Sustainability, a strategic choice for Poste Italiane with a full commitment in all processes and projects. A journey that began 3 years ago in order to create a new business culture. Sustainability, the only answer to the multiple challenges facing the market. Forward-looking and committed on reaching the 2050 European Green New Deal. Sustainability, for Poste Italiane, it is the model for creating significant value shared with all stakeholders, increasing reputation, and putting people at the heart of every decision. Prizes and awards drive us forward with great pride and sense of responsibility. Growing responsibly thanks to the decisive contribution of employees to the sustainable success, innovation, digitalization, and social cohesion of the country. This is the guide to achieving the goals in the group's sustainability plan based on 8 fundamental ESG pillars. Among the main goals of the plan, the company intends to maximize its contribution in the fight against climate change. In line with the Paris Agreement and the New Green Deal, Poste Italiane is focused on reaching international goals of carbon neutrality by 2030, well in advance of the schedule defined by the European Union. Poste Italiane is committed to setting climate targets in line with limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Proud to be joining a growing group of leading companies that are demonstrating the highest level of ambition on climate and paving the way for a net zero future. Improving the condition of employees and their families is continuing. For example, the implementation of a new corporate welfare model, workplace environmental monitoring, the reduction of accidents in the workplace. New Integrated Anti-Fraud Platform, PIAF, combining fraud prevention targets with improved customer experience by 2024. 100% ISO 37001 certification for the group by 2022. Ensuring equal pay for equal work is one of the pillars of gender equality. Poste Italiane is focused on reaching the prestigious Equal Salary certification issued by the Equal Salary Foundation, which certifies not only the wage equality between men and women, but also that the company, through its management, has put in place a structured governance aimed at eliminating all forms of discrimination. Poste continues its education and financial inclusion projects within the company and community in digital mode. The company aims to raise customer satisfaction levels by embracing innovative actions such as increasing digital transactions, increasing the number of merchants able to accept CODIS payments, increasing the number of biodegradable payment cards. The company aims to integrate the ESG criteria within traditional investment processes. Poste Vita will include 100% ESG factors in investment products by 2024. Sustainability, our guide for contributing to a better world. Poste Italiane, growing sustainably for a carbon-neutral 2030.
Good afternoon. I can see now all Sirene connected. You can see her. Good. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. And my name is Cosimo Pacciani, and Head of Research for Poste Italiane, the research hub of Poste Italiane. And today we thought to organize this panel as partners or European of the State of the Union on a specific topic. As you see from the video you just saw now, for us, Poste Italiane, sustainability is really at the center of our strategy. Also I don't want to do too much marketing, but also our new industrial plan is called Sustainability of Innovation. So for us, sustainability is really one of the drivers that we're looking at. And so the idea of deepening a topic like this one here today at the State of the Union was really because we also, let's say, some interest to understand, to have a dialogue, discussion about the topic of sustainability, mostly linked to the topic of how you can get to carbon neutrality and reduce your carbon emission by way of your own activities and capacity to move towards insetting activities or through offsetting. And also one of the big components is also how at the moment in Europe we are looking at the carbon markets, the carbon emission rights, and what does it mean in terms from, let's say, from a regulatory and regulatory perspective, and also from the perspective of practitioners. So today I have a panel with, I think, a series of people that have a lot of expertise on the field. I'm very honored and happy to have them with me. Starting from my left, I have Roberta Benedetti Del Rio. She's an expert. She's been a long time. She's one of the pioneers in the City of London on dealing with capital markets, sustainable finance, and green bonds. And today she's working back in Milan for a consultancy company dealing again with green finance. And I think it's going to be interesting to hear her views later on a discussion about what is the investor view about how offsetting and setting activities are managed. And then I have on the screen Irene Monasterolo, that she's a professor of, at EDEC on climate change, and I think is Irene, she has a long experience in a series of universities and academia, but also in European institutions in the field of climate change forecasting, and also you may appreciate all the work she's done recently also on the field of forecasting climate change and ESG criteria, and also on analysis of how ESG criteria and the markets then are able to interpret the ESG criteria, and also on the risk of greenwashing. So I'm very happy to have her with me. Then I have Jos Delbecque, also Professor UI, and is also an expert on climate markets, and is also a new course here, a new field of research here, precisely on carbon markets, also tie our attention because obviously we have a lot of, as you can see from the video before, we have a vested interest to understand more of these markets. And then Roberto Aquilini is our head of energy at POSTE Italiane. It's a completely new business. It's been just announced in the last weeks. So the idea is to offer you a path from the regulatory point of view, where we start state of the art now on carbon markets, and then going through the discussion first with Irene about let's say the climate change forecasting, and then how this adapts, and now how this the idea of carbon markets and offsetting then what is telling us about our capacity to reach the targets. Because as you can see, all the companies in the world, including mine, they're stating that we're going to reach specific targets by 2025, 2030, 2050, etc. So I think it's important also to have reviews in terms of the call to reality of what does it mean to reach the targets. And then we're going to have Roberto, we provide a corporate view of a company, a startup that is launching into an energy business, and what we are doing at POSTE Italiane in order to start a green and clean business to offer our clients energy services. And Roberta at the end will provide us an overview of on the offsetting and resetting activities and what is happening now, and also what is the interest of, for example, the investors to look into the European markets at this kind of activities, and what are the opportunities there, and also a bit also think about carbon capturing activities. So I would like to offer, hopefully today, a view from the regulators to the practitioners and to the market people about this topic. So I think I would like to start with Professor Delbecque, and I would like to ask him if maybe can provide us an introduction of where we are at the moment, because we have, let's say, recently ESMA published the final report that they wrote about carbon markets workings. Interesting enough, the paper didn't have a specific finding. Just saying carbon markets is an efficient market, working pretty much in line with other markets. Nevertheless, maybe I would like to start from this point. If you look at the aspects of the report, they also see a market where, for example, is in terms of volatility of the market, there is no, for example, no backwardation. The price of carbon rice will continue according to the report, and also the market aspect continue to increase. So maybe it may beg the question if it's a really efficient market to cover the risk. And also, and there was also the other report recently by Oxy about decarbonization of the economy. So the idea to start from that point of view, if you can give us an overview, we are now on the carbon market as offsetting tool.
Thank you very much, Cosimo, and it is a real pleasure to participate in the debate about how the corporate sector could take part of the overall target and effort to reduce the carbon emissions. In the European Union, we decided together with all 27 member states to implement the Paris Agreement, to go for climate neutrality by 2050. But 2050 is a far way off. So we defined also a target which is much more specific for 2030 to reduce our emissions with 55% below 1990 levels. So that's a very specific objective. And there are many policies that need to be implemented. You cannot go only for carbon pricing or carbon taxes or regulations. There is a multitude of policies that is being deployed by the EU. There is the renewable energy legislation. There is legislation on energy efficiency. There is legislation on cars, for example. You know that we are reducing the emissions from cars quite considerably. You know, when we take the total amount of cars put on the market, the share of electric vehicles is rapidly increasing. So the average consumption of a car is going down in Europe. And so there are many legislations, and the carbon pricing is, of course, a key element, because economic operators, you know, do not like to pay for something that they were used to emit for free. So the carbon emissions that you were following the use of your use of fossil fuels, be it coal, oil, gas, etc., you know, were unpaid. So you just discharge them to the atmosphere. So economists came with the idea, let's put a price on it, because if it is a price on it, people look at it and they reduce their emissions. So in 2005, in Europe, we started with the emissions trading system. It was the first system of its kind in the world. You know, in fact, there was a system, to be fair, in the United States on sulfur trading, where sulfur is very different from carbon. So we can say we learned it from the United States, but we implemented it at scale in the European Union. And it took us a while, because you know, it's good to have a price that needs to be paid on carbon, and it's good to nominate what every single company has to do. There are more than 10,000 installations in Europe covered. The entire power sector and manufacturing industry, steel, cement, chemicals, glass, pulp and paper, they are all covered. And so they are roughly a smaller half of the Europeans' emissions. And so it took a while before we got a decent price. Today, the price is relatively important. 88 euros per ton of carbon dioxide. In 2017, the price was hovering around 10 euros, and we were still suffering from the fallout of the financial crisis. There was an oversupply in the market. And, you know, together with my colleagues who are in the room as well, we were suffering a little bit to take out that surplus out of the market, but we succeeded. And since then, the price has been going up. And today, our companies look at their carbon emissions because it's beneficial to do that. Otherwise, you have to pay for your carbon emissions. And so the system is solid. We did not lose our time when the prices were low, because you have to have a system of tracking emissions. In jargon, MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification, needs to be very good. Otherwise, if you have a system with cheating, you don't reduce the emissions. And so we learned day by day, year by year, the system. And I think we can say today it is performing relatively well. It is the engine for Europe to reduce its emissions. Just to give you one statistic, today we are reducing our emissions in the covered sectors, so power and manufacturing industry, with roughly 25% compared to 2005, not 1990, 2005. And we have increased the production of the related companies. So we were not breaking the logic of economic activity, which was a very important element. We call that decoupling. So we increased the production and we reduced the emissions. And the system of pricing has been very good in doing that. Now, you mentioned the ESMA report, because people were saying the prices are going up so fast. Is there not speculation in the market? Is there not illegal speculation in the market? And so the Financial Market Authority, ESMA, was asked to do a report. Little caveat, in the beginning, when we did ETS, that was a really environmental policy measure. But increasingly, so much money was involved that we had to have order on that market. And so we asked, when the Financial Regulation Authority was being established in Europe, to take control over the market. And so today, an EUA, an allocation, a certificate that is being traded, is falling under the financial regulation. And that's why it was asked to the authority of the financial regulation to make a report. And it is the first time. It is a very interesting report. It has lots of data, very well done, really, you know, chapeau, I would say, to bring so many different, from so different corners, relevant data together. And they ruled that there was not more or less speculation in the ETS market compared to any other market. Yeah. And so we were reassured the market is ruled by its fundamentals. But of course, if the price would continue to go up and break through the record of 100 euros, and then, you know, we have to be vigilant. And that is also what the ESMA report said. We know there is no illegal activity going on, but we have to monitor it well, like we are monitoring any other financial market on equities or on other financial products. And so we are, you know, on a good track. I think we have a vehicle that is reducing the emissions in those sectors in a very cost-efficient manner. And cost efficiency matters because you could also have measures where you have basically payments up to hundreds of euros per ton of carbon dioxide. So that's an achievement, I would say. Now, the European Commission, in its plans for this 55% reduction, is saying, first, we will continue with this carbon pricing. Second, we have to widen the carbon pricing system to more sectors. And that's not yet decided. More sectors, the maritime sector is one of them. But one of the sectors where there is a lot of debate is on construction. I mean, heating fuels and transport fuels. So in Brussels and the institutions, there is a lot of debate. Should we do this? Yes and no. It raises potentially a lot of money. And that money would be used as a social fund to finance investments that people have to do in increasing the energy efficiency of their homes, insulation of their homes, heat pumps and all the rest of it. So that is not yet decided, but it may be decided, say, in the coming 6 to 12 months. That's one issue. The other issue is, of course, the companies that are covered. They are subject to international competition. And not everybody in the world, even you would say most of the world, is not having a comparable policy. And so our companies say we should be protected against unfair practices, carbon leakage, as we call it in the jargon. And so we need a kind of vehicle in view of not shooting ourselves in the foot, that we are reducing our emissions at home and others just export their products at a cheaper price to our market. And so in the past we did that to offering free allocation. a manufacturer in the steel sector gets a lot of certificates for free in order to moderate the impact on international markets. But now that the prices are high, people say that may not be sufficient. We need a tariff at the border, in jargon, a CBAM, a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And that is on the table as well of the legislature. It's not yet decided, it's coming. You know, my colleague Gerasimus Thomas, who is the Director General for Tax within the Commission, is managing and overseeing this negotiation. So if there are specific questions, we cannot be better dealt with by Gerasimus Thomas, who is overseeing the negotiations. So the system is going to be maintained, strengthened, but a few important elements are still open for change. Final comment, the corporate sector offsetting is not yet developed in the European system. Or to be more precise, it was developed some 10, 15 years ago. We called it the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol. You could earn credits. But the system was dying away. It, for all kinds of reasons, it's too lengthy to go into these reasons. But now, with companies expressing zero carbon commitments, the interest for offsetting has been increased again. And in Florence earlier this week, we were bringing together experts from all over the world, from the United States, from New Zealand, from Japan, from many European countries, to discuss how we may have a second look at creating offsets in companies, offsets that then can be traded on the market. We are not yet there, but the initiative that the private sector companies are taking is to be appreciated, because only the part that is falling under the ETS, the manufacturing of steel and cement and electricity, is covered. But there are many other activities that companies are doing. They have services, they have personnel, they have buildings, they have lots of more activities that could be the subject. There are international activities of a net zero commitment, and that is a very interesting element to look at, and I'm very much looking forward to what the experts are going to bring about, because it's new territory that I think it's worthwhile to develop it further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jos, for this introduction, even further down into the topic. And you touch a lot of interesting points. One, maybe the first one comes to my mind, is precisely started from the ESMA report, how we're looking through the financial market lenses and investment or secondary primary trading, because the report of ESMA also digs a lot into, for example, the futures market and the secondary trading of these rights. So it's transforming, let's say, what is a concern over the policy target into a financial markets concern or etc. On the other side, I think you also refer to the point of let's say, harmonization of data and kind of lack of data in relation to understanding, for example, how offsetting activities have an impact. And just coming from a panel on data, so I think it looks like a very general problem about collecting and using data for specific reasons. And I think a point to raise is about voluntary versus, say mandatory rights. And this is where I think could be interesting, because to ask Irene, she's connected with us. Where are you, Irene, today? Are you in France, Vienna?
I am in Vienna today.
Yeah, so. Perfect. As we're going to talk about your
CO2.
CO2.
But it's a good way to take stock since everything, let's say, started here on climate finance.
Yeah. So I think I would like to ask Irene Monasterolo her views about with their experience on climate change and climate finance, also the work she's done, also on forecasting and modeling, and also look, she had a lot into the financial markets to see what the players that telling specific stories about what they're trying to do in terms of offsetting the CO2 or their investment to make it greener, and then what is the reality. So I would like to ask you to start from there, Irene, talking about how you think carbon markets can have an impact then on the targets and the forecast that we see in terms of climate change in future.
Thank you so much, Cosimo, for the invitation and for the opportunity to actually take stock of let's say last 10 years of research in climate financial risk disclosure and climate financial risk assessment, because I believe that this is fundamental information to understand how to make carbon markets work. Why? Because what
just a second, because we have a problem with the volume. Could you please può alzare il volume?
Yeah, now?
Let's try.
Now?
I think there's a problem is here on the speaker.
Okay.
Maybe I'm sitting on a remote. No, that's right.
Okay.
No, we're checking. Try again.
Try again.
Now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it work? Okay. So no, thank you for inviting and for, I mean, this is a great opportunity to take stock of last 10 years of research on climate financial risk assessment and disclosure and risk assessment, in particular climate stress test, on which I've been working on and collaborating with several central banks and financial supervisors, which are now involved in the network within the financial system. Actually, this is also important in order to understand how to make carbon markets work. Because on the one hand, it's very, very relieved to see that there is growing engagement in carbon pricing, and also in carbon pricing that is higher, that's a bit more coherent with our climate mitigation objectives. And also on the fact that in growing number of investors actually committed to net zero. We can just see what happened on the run-up of COP26. At the same time, however, a couple of weeks ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, released the Working Group 3 chapters. And within those chapters, there is chapter 15, which is all about investments and finance. And the major barrier that the chapter highlighted in terms of reallocating capital from high to low carbon activities and to actually avoid greenwashing is right, the poor climate financial risk disclosure and risk assessment. What does it mean? Well, it means that now it's true with in the last years we had increasing companies reporting on climate, but this and also new metrics for sustainability or in particular environmental sustainability, like environmental social governance. But we should also consider that these data and metrics are characterized by several challenges. When we look at, mostly when we talk about disclosure, we talk about carbon footprint or in particular on CO2 emissions. This is the variable that is mostly disclosed by firms. But who discloses this information? Well, these are mostly large companies, but we still don't know anything about the 90% of small and medium enterprises that compose, for instance, the EU economy. Disclosure is still mostly non-standardized, in particular when we look at induced emission like Scope 3. And finally, there is very little comparability of emission reporting still across companies. Importantly also is that actually emissions alone are not, CO2 emissions alone are not enough to tell us how well a firm, and thus then an investor who invests in such firm is performing in the transition, in particular in climate mitigation. Why? Well, let's make an example. For usually we have the most of reporting for CO2 emission in Scope 1, so the direct emissions. Well, an utility company that produces electricity out of coal could decrease its Scope 1 emission and thus seems look greener, not by decarbonizing its business, but just expanding its business on trading. Thus, this actually implies major issues then in terms of our ability to make the transition in the time needed. And on the other hand, it also has implications on portfolio allocation of investors who, for several reasons, might want to go green. And this raises also an issue of what's called now greenwashing. It's true we are collecting more and more data also with machine learning and deep learning processes, but what is important to understand is what are we measuring with the data that we collect and the quality of the data. A second point is about metrics. We talked before about ESG. ESG became one of the most widespread tool for sustainable, as considered now as a proxy of sustainable investing. But actually, there has been a growing debate, in particular in the academia, about the so-called aggregate confusion of ESG scores. So depending on which on the data provider, you get different scores and rating for the same company. There is very little correlation across scores and by different data provider. There is also another, and this emerges quite interesting from a recent research that we did, where we looked at how, after the Paris Agreement, the E of ESG score of the largest 10 universal investors, so you name it, like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, performed, and we compared it with their portfolio allocation and investment decision in the type of activities that we overall consider as most misaligned with the transition, which are fossil fuel related activities. Well, what we found interesting is that the ESG score of such institutions, in particular the E score, which represents all the dimensions related to environmental sustainability, increased considerably, actually skyrocketed, in particular after 2018 and BlackRock's announcement of integrating climate. But at the same time, there has been also an increase in their exposure, in the investors' portfolios exposure to fossil fuel activities. And thus, at the light of this analysis, we should, and these results, we should also be a bit, let's say, open to discuss what does the data and metrics that we are using now for sustainability tell us about the real progress of firms and investors about, towards climate alignment. And this is not, on the one hand, it's very important in order to design policies that then would allow us to keep the very ambitious climate mitigation targets, in particular by 2050, even in the EU, like Fit for 55, but also to inform investment strategies like portfolios rebalancing, hedging, and nevertheless, financial supervisors' activities about preserving financial stability.
Thank you very much, Irene, and I hope everybody got most of the message. It was probably the volume at the beginning, but I think thank you very much for your intervention. I would like to come back to some of the points later on a Q&A question. But I think you touch a point about, let's say, how, maybe let's say the transition risk, not only from an industrial perspective, but also from what I would define the portfolio allocation or the market understanding of how this transition is going to happen. And I think it's reflected in this work you were referring, where you looked at investment managers, fund managers, and how the rating, ESG rating, increased at the same time. Also the amount of investments or portion of portfolio in specific industries you're not associated to. Carbon less intensive businesses increased as well. I don't think it's about saying this greenwashing, but it's some sense either of contradiction or of incompleteness of data, because maybe an underlying is also, we need to understand what is the underlying investment. You may invest in an oil and gas company in a specific country, and then you see that maybe it's dedicated to specific projects that are less carbon intensive. But I think it's very interesting because there's one point about, let's say, business behavior or building a business or transition. And this is why I think it's interesting to introduce Roberta Quilini from POSTE, our new energy business, because I think it can provide a view of what it means today to build a business from scratch. Let's say, let's call it a startup. in operations where POSTE was not before. Now we enter into this market. And so looking at how you enter into the energy business, how you're looking at the carbon markets, are also going to look into the idea that we have, the stated strategy, to provide energy services, green and in line with also our targets in terms of CO2 emissions. So, Roberto, the floor
Of
is
course,
yours.
thank you. Thank you, Cosimo. Let me say a couple of words about the strategic decision of Poste Italiane to enter in the energy market and what we are doing in this sector. It's a project that has been launched by our group in the framework of the new industrial plan, Sustain and Innovate 2024. That is a plan strongly focused on sustainability and innovation. In our business model, based on a platform of services for Italian citizens, we decided to integrate our services, postal service, insurance, bank, financial services, telecommunication, and so on, to integrate with these services also with energy. Energy sales, I mean sales of electricity and gas to the Italian customers. But to be consistent with our industrial plan, we decided from the beginning with our CEO to be 100% green. We want to have the best carbon footprint as possible. So we decided from the beginning to try to find any kind of solution in the market in order to reduce our carbon footprint and also to help final consumers to reduce their carbon footprint. Because we believe that we can, let's say, support Italian citizens not only in the digital transition, where Poste has a key role in terms of spreading the digital solution all over Italy, in every municipality of Italy, but we want to support Italian citizens also in the energy transition. So we want to support them in buying green electricity and also in reducing their carbon footprint. That's why we asked from the beginning how we can be 100% green. Where we are working on electricity and gas sales. So electricity production is involved in ETS mechanism. So in the price of electricity, it is included the cost of this system. But if you look at the energy sales, this is out of the scope, at least until today, of the ETS mechanism that has been designed for big plants and big polluters. In terms of final sales, let's start with electricity, because electricity is much more mature than gas sector in terms of green. Basically because electricity production has been created with hydroelectric plants that are 100% green from the beginning. Then there has been a carbon, oil, and natural gas plant. But fortunately, in the last year, there has been a big development of wind and solar plants. So an important percentage of the energy mix, of the electricity mix, is produced with renewable sources. In Italy, more than 1/3. That's why, thanks to the European directive, the first renewable European directive, this directive introduced in the electricity market two important tools to provide, to supply our customer with green electricity. There are guarantee of origins and fuel mix disclosure. These are two very simple tools, but very important. And we believe that these tools could be more exploited. And in fact, there is a revision ongoing, the Renewable Energy Directive number 2, that is currently under transposition by the member states, introduce some improvement in guarantees of origin and fuel mix disclosure. But as of today, these mechanisms are working, let's say, quite well, but they can be improved. What we decided to do, probably you already know how guarantees of origin works. If you produce green electricity, you get one guarantee of origin per each megawatt hour of electricity produced by renewable sources. And then if you want to sell green electricity, you need to buy not only the energy, but also an equivalent volume of guarantees of origin. Well, this system is working well. We are using guarantee of origin for more than 10 years after the RED I directive. Linked to the guarantees of origin, there is also the fuel mix disclosure obligation. Every supplier, every company selling electricity is obliged to publish on its website and on the bills. I don't know if you never checked your bill and you find out the chart where the supplier have to communicate you the energy mix of the country and the energy mix of the company. So many companies are saying that I'm green, I'm calling green energy and so on. But if you look at this chart, you see that only 5% or 10% of the electricity purchased by this company in the wholesale market is really green. So this fuel mix disclosure obligation is very important, but unfortunately, the major part of consumers haven't noticed yet this communication, or they don't pay enough attention to this communication. That's why the European directive is trying to improve this fuel mix disclosure. And in our case, we want to be very clear with our customer, very transparent. We want to buy only renewable electricity and to communicate as much as possible with our customers, saying that we are buying green electricity, and we want to track also the origin of our electricity in order to be able to tell to our customer, you are buying green electricity that is certified by the guarantees of origin, because it's an obligation, obviously. But in addition to that, we want also to tell you where we have bought this electricity, from which plants, and we want to tell a story to our customer about the electricity that has been produced by renewable sources and then supplied to our customer. So we can improve this mechanism, but from the beginning, we will start with 100% fuel mix, green fuel mix. Talking about gas, the gas is a less mature market in terms of green, because obviously there is only a few percentage of the gas can be called green as of today. Only the biomethane is a very promising sector, and I think that with this, with the current issue of security of supply, probably this sector will be supported again and again in order to increase the production of biomethane. But the quantity of the volume of biomethane today available on the market is not enough to be used by the sellers, the sales company, as POSTE or the other companies, to be sold to final customer. We would like to buy and sell biomethane, so we hope in the next future the biomethane sector will grow a lot, and there will be also guarantee of origin for biomethane. That today there are only some few examples, but not a strong regulation about the guarantees of origin for biomethane. The only way to get green not to get green, but the only way to reduce the footprint of our activity of selling gas to our customers is to compensate the emission of the gas that we are selling. That's why we are checking, and then we will buy some carbon offsetting voluntary certificates on the market of these voluntary certificates, linked to projects all over the world in terms of forestation or renewable energies, energy efficiency, and so on. So the only way to get the gas more green today is to buy voluntary certificate of offsetting. But this market is a market not so transparent. It's only a bilateral market. There is not a published price. There are no exchanges that exchange these credits. There is not a public price for these credits. So we hope that this market will evolve similarly to the evolution of the guarantees of origin for electricity.
Thank you very much, Roberto. And I would like to pass to Roberta, because after all the discussion we had, understanding the carbon markets working, what are some of the implications, and also some of the concerns raised by Irene, and also I think what Roberto was saying about the offsetting activities and voluntary versus mandatory, certificates. I think I'd like to have your view, because of your knowledge of structure in terms of sustainable finance and bonds. I think what is your view in terms of what are the actions, what is convincing investors, let's put it this way, and when they see, say, green bonds or green finance.
Thank you, Cosimo. And as the last panelist to speak, can I say thank you so much for organizing this great group and for inviting me to join this great group. I've certainly learned a lot already. So I'm gonna putting my investor's hat on, and I'll put my investor's hat in terms of an investor that actually looks at fundamentals of a business, not an investor that looks at the ESG ratings that I'm very grateful to Irene for bringing up as an issue in terms of their diffusion and their lack of actually indicative potential of sustainability many times. So as an investor that looks for sustainable businesses and looks at them from a fundamental perspective, I wanted to address maybe to start this issue around the offsetting versus the greening of a supply chain, which is also sometimes called insetting, which is basically purchasing or greening the supply chain that one controls and the things that one buys, be it the energy or other supplies. And for me, certainly, those are very different types of activities. So one could say that an offset from an investor perspective doesn't really reduce the risk of a business in terms of exposure to climate transition, to climate change. It doesn't create the resilience of that business going forward in terms of having those supply relationship already structured, already cemented, and ready to sort of create a whole economy and a whole business that's sustainable. So in a sense, I could say the offset could be compared a bit to the CSR work where you have a charitable donation, which is a great thing to do, but it doesn't quite cover for the unsustainability of a business. And over time, all businesses need to go within a gross sustainable level rather than a gross unsustainable level that then one tries to address through offsetting. So as an investor, we wouldn't necessarily give a value to the fact that some activities are offset through credits. Having said that, obviously I recognize that on a systems level, there's certainly a need for offsetting at least in the next 10 years because there are certain types of activity like limiting deforestation or spurring the market for engineered carbon removal solutions that actually rely on those offsets and of those voluntary markets to try and gather necessary funds to get off the ground. But there are certainly issues, as Roberto was mentioning, around the quality of some of these offsets, the race to the bottom, and the issues of not necessarily taking care of double counting if that happens. And so, insetting or greening the supply chain or buying directly, from a renewable electricity provider in this case through structuring PPAs, that would be obviously the gold standard from an investor perspective and something that we would very much like to see. Then the other interesting point I wanted to touch on is the link that was made between sort of the voluntary market, which is where the offsets sit, and actually the compliance market, the regulated market, where you have a carbon trading that the companies are, a carbon allowance that the companies are obliged to achieve or purchase. And on that, I want to say that I see with positive expectations, actually some of the developments that I've seen in Europe more recently around sustainable agriculture, for example, and around the conclusions on carbon farming and on creating a framework for creating offsets on carbon sequestration through farming. Because I think that creating that transparency of the mechanism and that just clearer way to incentivize farmers to achieve the carbon goals, but hopefully also the broader ecology goals that go very much hand in hand with the carbon goals, could really benefit supply chains and the economy overall, and if done properly, could create an interesting source of income for farmers, and avoid certain sort of race to the bottom behaviors that we've seen in other markets. I was also quite interested in seeing that in this ESMA report that you mentioned earlier, that the EU ETS system is 90% of the volume of global regulated carbon systems. And I was really surprised by that number. I didn't know it was so high. And on a global level, regulated carbon markets are still 20 or 25% max of the emissions. So not more than that is covered by a regulated carbon price globally. And so I just wanted to say it's really important, I think, to continue to show this leadership from the EU and to continue to push with these mechanisms, because investors really do rely on that much more than on voluntary markets and the offsets in terms of backing their business cases and placing their bets in something that they can believe in. And I think that's great leadership that should be continued.
Yes.
Can I perhaps make two comments? Of course, now China is, to some extent, copying the system that we have developed in Europe. So in record time, they are rolling it out, the Chinese manner. Of course, it's not yet fully established, but that carbon pricing system, for which they look very actively to the European experience, is going to change the percentage. It's not going to, China is a big country, so, we will see that percentage changing. The second element I wanted to make is on what Irene was saying. We have, and I did not mention that, in Europe also legislation on carbon disclosure. And that is applicable for financial corporates and for industrial corporates. And the legislation is already there, but the implementing legislation is being developed. But in any case, it is a serious kind of actions that companies will have to look at, because it is going to be an obligation that need to be delivered on the data related to Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. It's going to start with Scope 1 and 2 in particular, but that legislation is already coming. And so a lot of accountancy firms are already scratching their heads how to put all these data together, the many data that Irene was mentioning. So I just wanted to say Europe is moving fast on that front, and the obligations are going to be there in just a couple of months from now.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
And maybe, Cosimo, if I can just jump in to reply to this. The limitations that I discussed are right related to this legislation. Indeed, if you look even at the recent EBA report on environmental sustainability and at the European Central Bank report about our over 100 large banks disclosing in climate in Europe, actually, this is related also to their reports. So the fact that legislation is there, the problem is that legislation at this level might not be enough to get us where we want to be. And the problem is that if we don't address this now, we might have a financial sector, a financial market that in 5 years is all labeled as sustainable finance. If we look at the rate of increase of sustainable finance or climate-aligned finance over the last 2 or 3 years, but in reality is not contributing to green the economy. And thus, if in 5 years we realize that we missed, the sustainable finance we thought is not there, actually we will lose the climate targets.
Yeah, thank you, Irene. I think this is, let's say, it's particularly big debate. I think it could be interesting to continue on that, because I think one of the points that we touched all along the discussion was about, obviously, the policy structure, let's say the regulatory structure is there, is working, but at the same time, there are, say, inefficiencies, or let's say there is a transition to be done, to have there. Huge transition also in terms of educating ourselves as companies. What does it mean to provide specific set of data rather than others? So today I speak about data all the time, but I think it's relevant even here. There is a lack of data, or inconsistency, or absence of harmonization, homogeneity. I would like to move to the Q&A, because we have 10 minutes left, because somebody's flagging from the back for some time. I know at the moment we don't have a question. There is a 10-second delay, so
okay.
Okay, so if there are any questions online, ask them now or in 10 seconds because of the delay. And if there are questions, one there, and one, two. Okay, let's start on the first gentleman in front of me.
Thank you for the very interesting panel. I have a question on the CBAM mechanism. Okay, so it's a very straightforward mechanism. It is clear that it is intended to protect the European market from competition. But what about companies that are manufacturing in Europe and exporting to the global market outside Europe? Even considering that, Asia, probably in the very near future, is going to have probably a very big amount of cheap energy or cheap gas from other sources. And of course, the approach to emission, even if we recognize the effort of some countries, including China, is not probably, say, same level as Europe. Okay, so thank you.
Yeah, please.
Well, I would be happy to reply to the question under the control of my colleague, Mr. Thomas from TaxUd. Of course, it's not a protectionist measure. It's to protect us from carbon leakage related to carbon. And so the issue that you are raising, cheaper energy, with the CBAM is going to deal with the carbon content of that cheaper energy, not cheaper energy on its own. The second element is, of course, you mentioned exports. Rightly so, it's an issue of debate. The Commission made very clear that they wanted to have the CBAM in line with the principles of the World Trade Organization. And, that is something where the WTO is not very enthusiastic about, to put it mildly, to have export subsidies. But I think there's a good case to be made now that the carbon price is high to make a correction so that we are not shooting ourselves in the foot, or even better, that we incentivize those who want to import into Europe to take policy action that is comparable to what we are doing. So that will be good for the global climate, because climate is a worldwide problem. So that I think is the spirit in which the CBAM needs to be put.
Thank you. There was a question on the back. There was a gentleman on the third row. And then on this side, the question on this side. Okay, yeah. One there, good.
Good afternoon. My name is Piotr. I'm a research associate here at UI-STG, looking into, among others, issues of offsetting and voluntary markets. And a question I wanted to ask was about that last element of voluntary markets. And we know that the VCM, as we call it, is growing. Different projections, recent one showing that the market can grow even from 1 to 2 billion of tons by 2030. Private entities using VCM increasingly to demonstrate the achievement of their voluntary neutrality targets. So the first general question would be, how would you see the evolution of VCM in the future? And more importantly, how would you see the interplay and the relationship between the voluntary markets and the compliance markets? And perhaps a slightly more complex other element is the interplay of the voluntary markets with the international accounting rules under the United Nations Climate Convention. As we know, generally speaking, parties are supposed to, when using offsets against their targets, account them internationally. And voluntary markets thus far have not been strongly considered there, but with the decisions that have been taken last year in Glasgow at COP26, there may be an avenue to consider these. So the question here, some call for, credits from the voluntary markets that are properly adjusted and accounted for vis-a-vis party targets to be claimed as offsets, whereas those not really accounted for by parties to be only considered as contribution units, therefore creating two different types of assets. So I would like to ask your opinion about that sort of potential differentiation. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you much for the question. It may deserve another panel because of the series of topics, but maybe, I don't know, if maybe Irene, you hear the question?
Yeah, but
Yeah,
sorry.
about voluntary markets and monetary markets, or maybe Roberto.
But yeah, I mean, voluntary markets are very important and could actually, let's say, strengthen the identification of a group of willing investors. The point is then that if we want, we will need to have indeed, the amount of money that we need for making a transition could be there, but it's not going by itself. So probably the amount of the challenge that we are facing will not be sufficiently filled. I mean, the green investment gap that we are facing will not be sufficiently filled only with voluntary markets. We would need a stronger implementation and probably regulation.
Yeah, I'm conscious of the time because, yeah, can you ask the last question? Then on the other point, you can come back later. I want to finish. Yeah.
I'll be short. It's very related also with the voluntary market and offsets. So within that context, two of the panelists raised the point of lack of transparency on offsets. And then we're here talking about European regulatory approach. My question is, I would like to know your opinion about regulating that market. How much should we, it's still a voluntary action, a voluntary market, but there are some things that could be better. So in your opinion, up to which point should we be regulating that market or not? Thank you.
Yeah. Any takers? Maybe.
No, I have just one comment about the price of voluntary offsetting credit. I think for many years this price has been too low to push new investment and new project. Now the price is increasing because the demand is increasing. More and more companies want to buy these carbon offsetting credits. So this is bringing the price higher. But this should finally push new investment, support new investment all over the world. So we hope if this market will work, it will push new projects. Obviously, as I said, it's important to have a transparent price and a more liquid market in order to have the right price signals for investors all over the world, for buyer and for seller of these credits.
Perhaps one comment on the two questions, that what we learned in Europe under the ETS is that monitoring, reporting and verification is very important. Are these offsets real? Because the public says easily it's greenwashing. And if it is greenwashing, we should not pay any money for that. But if they are really real, they lead to emission reductions, they could be traded, and one day perhaps there could be an interplay between the voluntary and the compliance market, but only on the condition that this is really real and real emission reductions are flowing from them. If you are just displacing them, yeah, the people are going to say this is greenwashing, this is not serious. So it comes down to a very technical thing. Can we trace that emission reductions are really happening? Yeah. And there are many long debates to be had on that, on how to trace it, but also how to store carbon, for example, in the underground, or have forests absorbing carbon from the atmosphere, etc., etc. Yeah. So the best ones could well be used one day.
Okay, thank you very much. Obviously, we remain around if you want to keep the discussion with the people on the panel. And Irene, I think, is available to send an email to her for any questions. I'd like to thank you.
Absolutely.
And maybe I would like to conclude that today is the 160th anniversary of POSTE ITALIANE. I hope by the 200th anniversary, we will be at the same temperature in the world at least. So,
okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
greater connectivity benefits the greater good, and Qualcomm invented 5G breakthroughs that make it possible. See us where 5G is helping to make manufacturing more productive and less wasteful. Join us in making Europe more connected with 5G.
Hello and welcome to the 22 edition of the State of the Union organized by the European University Institute here in Florence. I'm Pierluigi Parco, I'm professor of the European University Institute, and I'm delighted to introduce this panel on the geopolitics of technology, standardization, and tech sovereignty. This is a topic that is becoming important day after day. Clearly, technologies are changing the world, but they operate in a context of increasing complexity. And the panel today wants to open a window on this complexity, on how especially geopolitics, the competition and the confrontation between the major areas and the major countries of the world is changing the way in which technology develops. That's the focus of our discussion. For this discussion, we have a great panel of speakers that I now will present. We have Carmen Artigas, on the Secretary of State for Digitalization and Artificial Intelligence in Spain, and an expert and also an entrepreneur before of this in this area. Then we are very happy to have here with us Mia Petra Compula-Natri, that is Vice Chair, a member of the European Parliament, and Vice Chair of the Special Committee on Artificial Intelligence in the digital age. So really on the topic of the discussion, what will face today. And we are also happy to have here with us Ursula Petrovic, that she's at the present, she's a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, but director of economic strategy at QUALCOMM, so a major player in the development of certain of the most important technology for the digital age. And last but not least, we have Lucilla Scioli, that is connected with us from Brussels. Lucilla is the Director for Artificial Intelligence and Digital Industry in the Director General of Connect at the European Commission, so is one of the real players in this discussion that we are going to have today. Let me start this discussion with saying that for all people that are participating via digital platform, you can submit questions for the speakers in the QA tab. While people present in the room, we will give you the occasion to ask questions at the end of the discussion. If you want to tweet about the panel, please use the hashtag SOU 2022, and let's get started. I would like to start with the question of principles at the beginning of this discussion. Europe so far has taken a lead in being considering the digital war an important referee. The GDPR was the first very important step. Another very important step has just arrived, the Digital Market Act, the Digital Service Act. This put Europe at the, somebody has said, as a superpower of regulation. But then the question is really that Europe is looking to aim at a stronger position in terms of economic performance, and this is the new challenge. So we are more and more listening about a discussion about technological sovereignty. But what is really this discussion? That's why I say I want to start from principles. What is technological sovereignty? How do you interpret it? What is the difference between technological sovereignty and technological leadership? What is really that we have to do to play this game in a new way? I think that makes sense to start from Lucilla, from the Commission, that tell us what they think about technological sovereignty today in this world.
Well, thanks a lot, first of all, for inviting me to this event. I wish I could be present with you, and instead of being in Brussels, but I really could not travel. Let me say, first of all, listening to your question, that maybe we should not distinguish a phase where maybe the European Union is perceived to have mostly regulated, and then a later phase where the European Union starts focusing more on competitiveness. Because in fact, we think that both policies, both aspects, ensuring that citizens and businesses are protected on the one hand and fostering competitiveness on the other hand, go together. And for us, they have always gone together. But the issue of technological sovereignty is probably an issue that has emerged more strongly, probably more recently with the pandemic, because of the increasing digitalization of our lives. So more and more aspects of our lives depend on digital technologies. And so we want to have the ability to decide ourselves how the technologies should be designed and applied on the basis of our European values. So I think this is what is technological sovereignty. It's really about being able to use and master and develop technologies that have the characteristics that we want. For example, in the European Union, we certainly want technology to respect our values in terms of trust, data protection, safety, fundamental rights in general, energy efficiency. So we, on the one hand, of course, we want to strengthen our know-how, but mostly we want to apply and use technologies that we like, and great if we can also reduce dependencies from other parts of the world. Now, to be technological autonomous does not mean that we want to be self-sufficient or autarkic or protectionist. This is mostly about strengthening investment in crucial technologies that are everywhere in our society, and that we can really choose on the basis of their characteristics, independently from who produced them, while at the same time still trading, of course, with the rest of the world, because we are in a globalized economy. Technological leadership for me is very different. This is one element maybe of technological sovereignty, but it's not the only one. Nobody can be a technology leader in every field, and we live in an interdependent world, and the value chains stretch across countries and across continents, across borders, and therefore we have to be able to trade exactly to be able to have access to the best technologies that are available. And just let me conclude to say that technological sovereignty for me does not mean that Europe has to be able to master all advanced technologies, but that it has to be sufficiently capable and have a sufficient know-how to be able to make its own choices. And that it maintains a competitive position, not because it imposes restriction on others, including on trade, but because it has a know-how and it bases its acts on the market forces, thanks to the excellence and the competitiveness of its industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucilla. How is in the Parliament this discussion about technological sovereignty? Because in the end, the Parliament is the political arena for in Europe for this discussion.
I think a lot changed after the COVID and even more after war on our continent. I too thought all the time that interdependency is good for the peace. It's good for the global actors come closer to each other. But then when the untrust comes, then you need to look again. So I think we are very eager to follow the ideas of the Commission also to build on the technological sovereignty, because then you can say what you want. We are not fully dependent on the applications or technologies on the market. So if I put it the other way around, where we want to go, where our democratic values want to take us, then you ask the technological developers that this is what we want. Do we have it on the market? And at one point you are questioning that maybe we have too liberal markets that do not have this kind of structures that prevent privacy. Is platforms working for the democracy? So you have a lot of good technologies that need also rules, but then really having also the tools that are needed for the future. We want to set it a little bit philosophical way. We first look what we want, and then we look at the markets. Does it exist? And it's better that you can also produce competitive technology as the European companies do, not to be fully dependent on the others. So this is, I think, functioning market economy. And I can say it proudly because I think still today, European Union is the most open market economy in the world. So sometimes this saying that you are a giant on the regulation, it's not said only by good intentions. It's saying that you're only regulating, you are preventing innovations. That's why Europe is lagging behind. We don't take full potential. But maybe thinking of the cars, we say that we want to get rid of the emissions. There is a market for the better cars, and then we will have more emission-free cars. So the same goes deeper and deeper in the technology, that we set the need on the markets to according to our values and welcome also the other parts of the world actors to play, but then also not to be fully dependent. Is it then the COVID? Is it then the war? Is it a stuck ship on somewhere on the production chain that we are vulnerable, and we don't want to be vulnerable, we want to take it. So also I want to repeat what Lucia said. It's not to be isolated, it's actually building bridges and cooperate even more closely with the like-minded and give the openness for those who share the values and produce the equipment, the technology that we want to set rules on. This is kind of way I see the also the leadership, but then sovereignty, open sovereignty.
Thank you. Thank you, Petra. Carma, Spain is one of the major players in Europe, obviously it's a big country. How do you technological sovereignty interpret from the member states? Is the same as interpreted from the European Union? And anyway, how do you contribute to this discussion of the Union?
I agree with the views of Lucia and Maria Petra that, of course, technology sovereignty or technology leadership today is a matter of changing also the geopolitical power, not always on the hands of states, national states, also in the hands of non-state or non-governmental players or actors like big companies. And that is putting into question some of the principles and values of our democracy, because it affects not only our technology, not only our industry, not only our economy, but also our society, because it can indirectly modify the balance in the rights between employees and employers, the right on our privacy, and the way society is structured. And this is why it's becoming very important, and we didn't have that discussion in the previous revolution. In the Industrial Revolution, nobody was taking care about if it was impacting our model of society. But now it's happening with the digital revolution, because once everything is dematerialized, once our industry is becoming more digital, it's affecting also the decision-making, and it's altering some principles that were very important in the construction of our society. So for me, it's important that we understand that technology is at the heart of the balance of power in the new society. That means that Europe needs to define or fight for a certain leadership in technology, but at the end of the day, is a leadership on a model. In the model, we are developing technology in the future. You were mentioning the importance of sustainability and how the environmental approach of Europe is guiding the development of an important industry and taking the lead. COVID has put into relevance how dependent we were in critical assets, such as chips, or the excessive depending on our value chain on third-party players. And that is putting also our countries into risk. And this is why we need to recover a certain level of autonomy in terms of our capacity to innovate in a sustainable way. It's not just because we have put our eyes on AI, quantum, cloud computing, chips. These will change over the time. Now these are the technologies that are the most disruptive ones. But in 10 years' time, there will be another 10. And that we need to ensure that we're looking at the right place. I always put the example that the new wave of AI, which was deep learning, was developed by a company of 15 PhDs in London. Europe was not looking at that company. We were not looking at the right place. We were not realizing that we're starting a revolution because we were trying to save our industry after the first crisis in 2008. So we're not looking in the right place. So now we have realized that the recovery of our industry is a digital recovery, and that we look more at building our own capacities for innovation in a sustainable way. In particular, we are in favor in regulation as long as it's the right balance between finding a basis for regulation without hampering innovation. I don't think regulation is good or bad. Either it's intelligent or it is not intelligent. And we are always putting as example GDPR as a way in which Europe, through a regulation, really create a new standard, a gold standard that everybody followed. But I want to recall that also another regulation that was GSM and 3G, creating a leading industry worldwide, which was the mobile and wireless industry. So thanks to regulation, while in Europe, we were already with our phones all over Europe with roaming, in the States they were with their pagers, and they could not roam from one state to the other because they had to change of telecom providers. So sometimes also regulation is interesting or is useful to create a new market. I don't think it's the only thing we need. We need to invest much more in our talent, in our skills, and our investment and growth capacity. And I think that Europe has also the opportunity to find a third way. In this digital revolution, we have like two models, like more the surveillance capitalism that we see in China, also the domination of digital platforms in the US, and I think Europe is proposing a third way, a way in which technology development is not putting to risk our democratic values. This is why in Spain we are promoting the Charter of Digital Rights. It's like our beacon to say, okay, we don't want technology revolution at any price. At the price of increasing inequalities, at the price of leaving someone behind, or at the price of missing in this process some democratic values, like the right of, the right not to be discriminated by an algorithm. So I think that are the topics that probably Europe can put on as also reference, and I'm convinced that people will mirror also the rest of the countries are also looking at Europe, and they expect that we are successful in that.
Thank you. Yes, Urska, technological sovereignty seen from the side of a major company, a major producer of certain technologies, is a threat, is an occasion, how do you react to the issue, and also how do you relate this with technological leadership?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's an honor to be on a panel with such prominent speakers, so thank you very much for having me here. And I agree with everything that has been said so far, and I think I will repeat many of the points that you have already made, but perhaps from a slightly different perspective. So in my view, when we talk about technological sovereignty, what we really mean is technological leadership. And let me explain why I think it's so. So companies like the one I work for, QUALCOMM, that have developed innovation that underpins modern technology have long recognized the importance of technological leadership. So Qualcomm drove the so-called wireless revolution from 1G to 4G, and now is working on 5G, which the technology that will enable the world connecting everything to everything and everywhere. And if you think these technologies like 5G, they're really the foundation upon which other industry verticals build. Think about the automotive industry with connected cars, they need to rely on 5G. Think about the IoT, think about the industry 4.0. These are all industries that will rely on these technologies. So basically we can think about these technologies in a way as a blueprint of a building, right, metaphorically. And leadership in these technologies is essential because without leadership, you don't have control of how these technologies are developed. So we talked about security, we talked about privacy, we talked about democracy. These are all things that basically technological leaders are able to influence. And a company or a country that has no technological leadership is basically a technological taker, user, is not the driver. And not surprisingly, we have seen that major countries in the world have recognized the strategic importance of technological leadership. We have seen this in Asia, we have seen it in the United States, and we have seen it in Europe. There have been many initiatives recently that talk about the desire of the European Union to become a technological leader in some key technological areas. For example, one area that I focus on is technological standards. And in February, there has been a publication of the European Standardization Strategy. And there is a statement, I mean, the strategy recognizes that European company had a very important role in developing global standards, such as telecommunication standards. But the strategy also says, and I will quote, "The strategic importance of standards has not been adequately recognized at the cost of EU leadership in standard setting, and this must change." So there is really a recognition about the importance of technological leadership. And the key question, of course, is what are the policy pillars that we need to focus on to enable EU companies to be technological leaders? And well, at least when it comes to technological standards, to be the leader, you need the best technologies. And this requires investment in R&D. So how do we encourage those investments in R&D? And I think in a market-driven economy, IP rights are certainly one of the important tools that we have. So this is certainly something, the other tools as well that can encourage investment in R&D. And you mentioned earlier, Pierluigi, the DMA. This will certainly play an important role in the global digital ecosystem. It will ensure that markets are open and that technologies can compete on technical merits, and this is what drives innovation and enables technological leadership ultimately.
Yes, thank you. And you open somehow the way for the second question I want to pose to all the panelists, that is moving from principle to tools and policies. Let's see, there are some certain technologies, there are many technologies, as Kama was mentioning, but let's focus on a couple that clearly are on the move and that are most important for this discussion about technological leadership. Artificial intelligence is clearly one technology on which the revolution is moving quickly. And then we recently discovered how semiconductors are very important as another tool for the technological revolution. And both these areas in which there appears to be a power competition between the United States and China that probably ever started the challenge before. And so the question is, what are the key industrial and policy pillars that Europe can play in this competition with respect to this critical technology and the implications of the relation between the areas of the world? I think I would like to start with Mia Petra, that, by the way, is working on artificial intelligence committee. So, please.
Yes, actually, the IDA committee worked 1.5 years and had the report ready from the parliament this week. So it is 50 pages, and I hope that those will be used for the further regulation or ideas on the different sectors, because of course AI can be used in many, many sectors for the good of the society, bearing some risks on at the same time. But I think the competition is good when it's about the markets and driving for the innovations, but then it's a goal that what we are competing on. So are we competing with the society that is best for its citizens, which is clean, the world we can survive in because of the emissions, the climate change? Is it so again, setting the goal where you want to go and what to reach? It's not a competition who can most easily score its citizens then locate where they are, taking away the citizens' rights or civil rights, but then still talking that. So there needs to be some standards. So competing only in the terms of economical success, it seems to be very strong nowadays. So we kind of need to create a demand for another kind of technologies too, and that's what we are doing. So we are competing maybe in the different series, so that somebody is running and somebody is skiing. But anyway, I think there is a lot common on the technology, of course, and we need to cooperate a lot. As I said, I think there is not isolation when we want to lead or be involved much. We want to close very much aligned, and Europe is calling for the international cooperation. But could we at least ask the technology is respecting the UN Charter? That is the main, the start with, but then we do have the OECD, G20, global partnerships that we really wish to work, and the latest is the Technology and Trade Council too. So I think Europe is the one openly working together, but we also need to work inside to be able to deliver, to be able to produce our share for the technological development. So I think what we started already on the European level, it is that we need to digital single market. Not the Spanish market for AI, or not the Slovenian or Finnish market. It's too small. We don't do that. So now I hope that the data spaces will come to help us. But then I think the lack of skills is very much intended. But it's not so easy, because I know that United States had their idea for the technological development, and that was calling for the skilled people. Then you take, okay, let's look global south somewhere, but even Indonesia, other countries, they are also fighting for the talent. So I think that we really need to look also the educational systems, lifelong learning, but also open MOOCs, for example, that you can start. Everyone can start. A dentist can start studying AI. So there was one course of elements of AI that was a gift of the Finnish presidency for everyone to use, and you can use it in every European language nowadays. But also I know on the AI system we have ELIs and networks, and I'm a strong believer of the distributed knowledge, because AI is not one center you can do. But the Europe to deliver, you will use AI for health, AI for climate, AI for education, AI for banking. So mapping, doing, and really investing on that. Always you find bigger investments in China and US, but I think we need to be proud of what we are delivering now, the Digital Europe, 2.6 billion euro for AI, the Horizon Europe, 2.1 billion to AI. So to be proud what we are doing, also give hope for the youth and young generation, also for the startups, that yes, there are good markets and good trials to do inside Europe. You don't need always to look at the old, that it used to be always the only Silicon Valley or the China way. There are demand, there are possibilities in Europe. So I conclude, if we know where the competition wants to take us, then there is a big European markets also to deliver. And then I believe that as we did for the privacy, it was not very popular elsewhere, but now I think also there is a demand for the technology that can guarantee the privacy. Same we believe in the climate. I think the clean air is a common good that you want to deliver, so the one who solves the technology can have the even global market. So this kind of trendsetter on the human-centric and for good technology, Europe can be proud of.
Thank you. Karma, I know that you have worked on big data, and that's one of your issues. So looking from Spain, do you think European countries are moving on AI, on chips, on these technologies with a sufficient speed? Do you think they should coordinate more? But what do you think?
Yes, of course. I mean, Europe needs to definitely not be just a witness of what's going on and just be consumers of technology. We need to be developers and creators of technology. And I think that the good thing is that in the last 4 years, every single country has deployed their national strategy in AI, but we should coordinate more at a European level, because we must become a really global competitor in this field, probably with a different approach, like is a fair AI or ethical AI or human-centric AI. but that will certainly give us competitive advantage. I think that we are very good on academic research and scientific productivity, but we have not been, I would say, efficient enough in transferring all those AI developments into the industry. One example is what we have done in Spain. We have launched a call for tenders in a program called AI for the Value Chain, in which we are not only encouraging R&D investments on AI, but on the real adoption of AI in every single sector of the economy, in the traditional value chain, and not only on the big tech players, also on SMEs and small companies, because that's probably where we also have the gap. We see that only in the hands of the companies, but if we leave SMEs behind, that will never take off in terms of our impact in our economy. So I think we need to see the shift from the disappearance of verticals as we know them. We are all transitioning towards a data economy where verticals are no longer as we used to consider them. We are all horizontals, and we need to gain capacities for computing, process high computing capabilities like cloud, edge, and quantum. We need data, and out of that data, we need to build intelligence. And out of that intelligence, we need to transfer them to the market. So we have been very slow in transferring all those innovations in the market. That's an area of course, of clear area of improvement as a European level. This is why it's important, as Maria Petra mentioned, the single digital market, that we really harmonize our regulations all over Europe, that we are doing with, of course, the European Regulation on AI and DSA, DMA. It's important, this coherence. And we need to invest much more on the venture capital and startup ecosystem. We need to be able to build unicorns in Europe. We are exporting our talent. We are building a high ecosystem of startups, but when those companies need to scale up and grow up, they leave Europe because they don't find the right money, the right investment to scale up. And we really solve them very cheap to the US, to Asia, to Israel funds. And this is something we are focused very much in Spain. We have launched this big 4 billion national fund called Next Tech, aimed to invest in scale-ups. Just a figure, last year, Spain reached the record number of 10,000 startups, attracting 4 billion investment. So this fund only has 4 additional billion for scaling up. And we are also talking with the European Investment Fund in sharing this vision of creating a fund of funds also at a pan-European level, aiming for a more 1 billion, 2 billion funds to really scale up, because that's the challenge we have. We have very good startups or very good spin-offs from universities, but they grow slowly. And there's really a small window of opportunity and time to market. So I think that's what we need to invest more in the adoption of AI in all the traditional sectors only, in all the value chain of the traditional economy. We also have some important opportunities. For example, in Spain, we have this dual balance between ecological transition, digital transition, and green transition. In fact, in the recovery funds, we are devoting 30% on the digital transition and 36% of the funds in the green transition. But we see a lot of synergies, not only in the application of AI for sustainability, but also on what we have launched in Spain, which is our national plan on green algorithms. We think that Europe can become the leader on green tech. So technology, which is developed green by design, looking for energy efficiencies since day one. And that can be also an area of interest. And also from the particular vision of Spain, we think that we can provide Europe with the right bridge to Latin America, thanks to our language. And we have a special plan on developing AI in Spanish language, because all the AI is developed in English or in Chinese. And we have rooms for opportunity with the 600 million of Spanish speakers in the world. And behind a language is not only a transactional tool for communication. Behind a language is a mind map of the world and a mind map of your values. And I think we can also influence in Europe in building that bridge with Latin America through Spain and through AI. And that are the things we consider important. This support to SMBs, not leave them behind. This more go-to-market strategy and how can we move from the academic research to the impact in our economy, and this leverage of all the capacities we have. And this is happening, I agree with what Lucila said, this is not technology autarky. This is broader collaboration, and we probably need to reinforce the transatlantic alliances at the eyes of the geopolitical situation. And I think there are a lot of synergies between Europe and US in terms of research, as well as with Japan, with Israel. This is something very important that we can leverage from Europe.
Thank you. Now, I want to call Lucilla on this to connect really. The Commission is doing many things on AI. There is a major effort, and is also doing, and this is a very important development, this CHIP Act, on which there is a lot of curiosity actually. So, Lucilla, how are we doing on tools and policies?
Well, I certainly, first of all, subscribe to all the objective and the activities that have been mentioned both by Mia Petra and Carme that are ongoing in the European Union. And you know, until now, our most important programs have been the research program, and then most recently we also have the Digital Euro program, which offers this possibility to support capacity building. And in artificial intelligence, we are very much looking now at a new kind of entity called the testing and experimentation facilities, which we really hope help in bringing innovation from the from the lab to the fab. But you know, and for us, for the main objective of our policy in artificial intelligence is, of course, to strengthen our capabilities, but also to become leaders, in particular in industrial applications, because maybe compared to China and the United States, that's where our comparative advantage tends to lie. But what I would like to maybe mention that is peculiar maybe in the European Union also compared to other parts of the world for artificial intelligence is the proposal that we are discussing with the Parliament and with the European Council on artificial intelligence, the AI Act. And I think it's important to keep it in mind because we are the first continent in the world that produces some rules on artificial intelligence. And the reason why we do that is because, like Mia Petra said, AI has a lot of the potential for a lot of positive impacts, but it also carries some risks. And the risks tend to be in terms of violation of fundamental rights and of safety. And so we think that if we can develop in the European Union trustworthy artificial intelligence, then we can also make sure that more people and more businesses actually use it without fear. And so we came to introduce some rules to facilitate the development of trustworthy artificial intelligence. And it's not easy because you have to find the balance between not hindering innovation and at the same time fostering trust. And so to do that, we have come up with the idea of approaching artificial intelligence not as a technology, but as a tool that is used in certain contexts. And so we have developed rules that are based on risk and apply to not to the technology at large, but only to those use cases that are considered to be high risk in terms of violating fundamental rights. And the idea is that these rules will apply to all the artificial intelligence systems that will be put in use in the European Union, regardless where they are made, in Europe, in China, and the United States. But what is important is that the artificial intelligence that will be used in Europe will be trustworthy. And of course, it would be great if it was also green, as Carmen mentioned. And we are also making a lot of support available for developments in that sense. On semiconductors, we are doing something different with the CHIPS Act. So this is another act, but it has a different inspiration. So here we really need to limit our dependencies from other parts of the world. We have, as an economy, experienced a lot of important shortages that have impacted many economic sectors in the European Union. Often we talk about automotive, but it is also true for healthcare, energy, industrial automation, and many other sectors. And the reason why we have these shortages is because we have this structural problem of depending on production of chips by very few players in Asia, in other parts of the world. And excessive dependence and we know it from the war now, is never good to have. And so we have proposed a set of rules to be able to, on the one hand, strengthen our know-how, but also increase our production capacity, and generally speaking, ensuring security of supply and also greater competitiveness or making Europe a better place to invest for semiconductors. And so now we are discussing the rules in Council, but I would consider really this proposal a very good example of a proposal in favor of technological autonomy. Again, it's not about closing the doors to imports. We will continue to import in chips from all over the world, and hopefully we will also export them. But we simply want to strengthen our capabilities and be able to rely more on ourselves, exactly because chips are everywhere today, and shortages of chips can have devastating effect on our economies and on our societies.
I would like just to make an additional comment on what Lucilla says, very important on the European regulation on AI. I think it's a great opportunity, and it can become a competitive advantage for me on this new way and the third way. But we must be very aware that we close very soon and very fast the gap between what legislators think we should do and what practitioners in fact can do. Because otherwise, we would not be prepared in 2 years' time. We have not adapted our methodology, especially thinking about SMEs. We cannot afford that when this important legislation comes to place, we need to, let's say, enlarge 2 more years because we have not prepared our industry, or we have not adapted that legislation to the real state of the art of the technology, what the technology can do. If we say, okay, we want to audit an algorithm, how are we going to do that? What is the data set I'm going to ask to this particular industry? And that's the work we're trying to work together with the Commission on finding out how we should establish working groups between the different member states and defining those guidelines, those methodologies, before the legislation comes into place. Because then we hit to give, like it happened in the GDPR, that was absolutely painful and was absolutely costly, especially with the small and medium companies. And if we need to have like a 2-year more adaptation period, that has an effect that if we let technology develop with no constraints like in the Far West, it will be more and more difficult to reverse the negative effects of that AI technology developed without constraints. And I think it's very important that we really are very active during this preparation time to really adapt and come down to earth those legislation principles into really guidelines, methodologies, and that can be applied by the industry since day one.
Yeah, no, it's very wise if we prepare. Urska, you can tell me what is your idea about AI, but also I would like you to focus on the semiconductor issue and the CHIPS Act. How a company like Qualcomm react to this effort, new effort by Europe to become a player? How do you, is an opportunity, how do you perceive it?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Qualcomm is a fabulous company, so it's a leader in design and R&D, but it relies and cooperates with other companies to manufacture its chips. And this cooperation works generally very well, but any supply chain is as strong as its weakest link. So if there is a disruption of any level, this can cause significant delays in the delivery of chips. And the recent chips shortage has really, I think, highlighted the need to create more resiliency. And to be clear, the semiconductor industry has always had these cycles of oversupply and undersupply, and the industry tries to respond to this. But this crisis was different, and it was different because of 2 main reasons. One is the magnitude in the increase in demand that we have seen, and this is because of the move to the digital economy where everything is connected. But then there is also this geopolitical dynamics that we have seen to which the semiconductor industry will have to adapt, right? And I believe that things that the European Union is doing can be extremely helpful in achieving this goal of having a more resilient global supply chain. And as Ms. Scioli mentioned, well, one thing that really needs to be done is the is the geodiversification of the supply chain. Right now, we have a really high concentration of manufacturing in Asia, and so creating more diversity in this manufacturing will provide the resiliency that we need. And that's what the CHIP Act tries to do. It tries to create fat capacity where it doesn't exist. So this is very much a welcome thing. And although creating resiliency in this manufacturing is important, there is also a separate and equally important goal that Ms. Yoli also mentioned, and it's basically this thing of need to focus on innovation and technological leadership, particularly at the early stage. This is really the point with the highest value added and R&D intensive point of the chip supply chain, and this will be really critical to create the resilient and technology-driven economy. And, but of course, innovation in chip, it takes a long time, it's really resource intensive, both in terms of human resources, financial resources, and it's risky. So again, there is a need to create an environment where we encourage this type of investments. And of course, again, IP rights might be important, but here I think really there is a need to focus on other strategies. And the European Union has some very good programs that have encouraged this type of early stage investment in innovation. I think IMAC, CLETIC, these are all excellent examples that of programs that should be continued in the future. I believe someone earlier mentioned the need to attract the right people, right? So education and attracting skilled workers will be important. But I also very much agree that countries have come to the conclusion that no country can be on its own and solve this supply chain. It's impossible for one region to deal with this. So cooperation, well, it's also very important.
At this point, I would like to open the floor if there are questions from the participants. I have many other questions that with a panel like this, but let's get the...
Hello, everybody. This is Andrea Renda. Also, hi, Lucilla. You can't see me. Yeah, I don't know. But I have a very simple question with regards to the Trade and Technology Council, meaning knowing a little bit from Lucilla and Mia Petra, what should we expect? What can we achieve in terms, in particular, in cooperation on artificial intelligence and on semiconductors within the context of the Trade and Technology Council? And if there are things that we should try to achieve and we are not currently, we haven't thought about it, and we should perhaps accelerate on that issue. So that is primarily for Lucilla and Mia Petra, but I'm sure also the other panelists will have something to say about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's, Lucilla, maybe you can start on the technology.
Thank you. Well, the summit on the Trade and Technology Council takes place in about 1 week time, so you will find a lot more details there. I think that there is a, we are discussing with the United States, and of course we have very different regulatory framework. As I said, we have our AI Act on the table under discussion among institutions, and the United States, for a long time, they didn't have anything, and now they are looking at a Bill of Rights for Artificial Intelligence, and they are developing it. And we are working together in the context of the OECD and the OECD principles. But what can we do together? So one of the discussions, one kind of discussions that we have concerns very much their views on our regulatory framework and our views on their Bill of Rights. And of course, we try to influence each other, but and this happens through regular exchanges. But I think that the most important thing we are trying to achieve is in the area close to standardization. So they have NIST, which is the Science and Technology Institute, which is very strong in artificial intelligence, and they're not a standardization body, but they're very good at measurement and evaluation tools. And we need to have those tools exactly to be able to implement the regulatory framework, as Carmen said, as quickly as we can. And those instruments are very important for us to be able to assess, for example, some of the requirements that we have put in the legislation, or simply to develop and to help our standardization organizations to develop standards which will be crucial, in particular for the small medium enterprises, to show that they are compliant with the regulatory framework. So I think that in this area that is very close to standardization, and we are this is the most promising area at the moment for our collaboration.
Yes. I go to Mia Petra on this, but let me add to this question. Because the Trade and Technology Council is very important and is an effort of the European Union and the US to find a common ground. But how much are we risking to have bifurcation in standards at this point with these geopolitical tensions? And can we afford this? What really should be the strategy in this period? And this is a question I want to ask to all of you. Petra.
Generally speaking, we of course hope for the global standards, but being practical to see the challenges in any international body, you don't find everybody on board. So what is the next best thing is to find as many as you can, like-minded, and then we do have groups of G20 or OECD, but also I'm following the e-commerce on the WTO 86 countries. Doesn't take big steps at the moment because the tensions are increasing and not decreasing. So also there is appetite on both sides. If Europe doesn't find a way together with the United States is doing partnerships with the very many other Western countries. So the Europe is getting smaller in the corner and more alone. So of course, wishing to have technological standards which fits for our aims also, it's good to have the cooperation transatlantic. That's what I found in the papers of the United States that with the Quad countries, they do have a digital partnerships, even the parliamentary level. So we should be like waving that, hey, we are interesting partners too, with some 17% of the market still and a lot of startups and knowledge and technology. So they should be aware and not looking only the boosting Asian countries, for example. So that is our motivation. Then the China policy of the US is maybe their motivation to find more collaborative partners. That's one thing. But if I really look the standards, which I think is important, we have the standards body, the global standards body. I'm always lobbied and said that should be industry-led standards body, but that's not the fact quite more. You have authoritarian states planning more involved. So if we want to keep the industrial-led, then you need to have a new policies there as well. So I would at least add very specifically on the AI Act. If you want to have easy AI Act so that there will be more innovation, there needs to be some standards that this is fulfilling the criteria. And those standards, where they are developed, how, and then why we are looking at the risk AI application, because we want to protect the fundamental rights. Then we don't have that. It's a new world that you should have the technical standards respecting fundamental rights. So there we need some policy planning, and if we can do that together with the United States, we can try. If not, then it's a good exercise in between the Commission and Biden administration, and then we will do legislation again if we wish. So this is, I think, transparency, easier with the like-minded countries, if we are enough. So they like keep the phone lines open, that we are planning this, you are planning that. Can we act globally more when we're planning more? So this is my expectation for the TTC to push for the global impact with the principles of democracy and hopefully also competitive market economy.
Thank you, Karma. You were mentioning Spain, Spain special relation with Latin America, and how do you feel about this thing of a possible bifurcation of standards, of the breaking of what we have seen as a common?
I don't think it would be a good situation creating this rivalry of standards and trying to impose one. I think we are in a global economy and we need to think standards that either we share some common principles or we make them interoperable, because then we really create blocks, and that's against competitiveness and against collaboration. But I would like to raise a hot topic, because when Lula was mentioning the necessary alignment within the United States, I think we cannot forget that AI is based on data. Our power in the development of AI resides in our data sovereignty, because Europe is powerful in terms of our market size, in terms of our capacity of technology development, but also in terms of our data. And for me, it's important that we establish very soon what are the conditions in which we will transfer data between third parties in a secure way or in a trustful way. So really, the way we regulate data flows between Europe and outside Europe, but that means the United States, but also OECD members, I think are very critical in the way we're going to develop our industry too. Because we cannot forget that our data is our key strategic asset. And we need to keep citizens' data in Europe under our regulation and protection, but then this is the reason why we cannot just transfer that data without trust. And I think one of the hot topics we need to solve. We need to, of course, reinforce the collaboration in areas like cybersecurity, and that requires, of course, a coordination at the global level. And also, we need to bear in mind that technology standards are no longer just technology standards, because they are also policy standards. And we're seeing that, for example, in the regulation that we are, or the future certification on cybersecurity on clouds that ENISA is providing, in which you are introducing some also policy attributes, not only technical attributes. So I think when we see the collaboration, especially with the US, I think we need to look at very carefully on the data transfer, data flows, also and the impact of Cloud Act regulations or a Cloud Act similar legislation that can interfere in the protection of Europe in our sensible asset, which are citizens' data.
Yes. Urska, again, still on standards, last word on how severe could be bifurcation? Why is so risky for the industries?
Yeah, so I think we should differentiate between two types of standards. One is standards when we refer to regulation, and here, as we talked, sometimes cannot find agreement, and so that's really not an option. Then we have technological standards, like let's say cellular standards, right? And this is an area where we have achieved global standards only recently, like only with 3G we got a global standard that applies everywhere, and before there were all these interoperability problems. So going back to standards that are divided by region would be a step back, right? That would necessarily have implication for consumers, both in terms of interoperability and in terms of cost. It would also have implication for innovation, because to make this, we talked earlier about how there is a need to make investment in R&D, and if you don't have access to global markets, you don't get the scope to recoup those investments, so you need to lower the investments. And consumers would have only the availability to technologies that have been developed in a specific area, geographical area. So I agree very much that the ideal goal is to maintain global standards, but how can we achieve that? And what you mentioned is very important. Do we need rules that everyone respects, right? So transparency, consensus-based, these are all rules that should be set and respected by everyone, and that way we can keep the global standards with all the benefits that they bring.
Well, we are at the closing of this discussion. I think that at least what I gather from this is at least two messages. One is that we want a more competitive but not closed Europe, and that's very important for our future and also for the technological evolution. So geopolitics of technology doesn't mean closing, means dealing with the issues and discussing and competing, but keeping as much as possible an open way to discuss. But on the other end, we also need, when we discuss standards, there are technological standards, and these are very important and fundamental for everybody. But also we have some standards of rights that are important for Europe and probably for the world. This was a great panel, great discussion. Thank you very much. I think we can close this great group of